Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus. Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel. We've got a lovely story tonight about 3 lumberjacks who had an encounter with a Sasquatch who literally saved their lives, because as you know, lumberjacks have a very big responsibility in the woods and their jobs are very, very dangerous. So let's get started. I really think you're going to enjoy this story and it really is food for thought. He says here, "Hello Sarah, my name is Ethan and I'm a 4th generation lumberjack from the Pacific Northwest. My great-great-grandfather was a spirited pioneer in this industry, using only an axe to fell 5-ton white pine trees. In those days there was tons of forest that needed to be felled to make way for crop growing, to create towns and to later build cities. It was a time when wages for a lumberjack were sky high because there was such a high fatality rate, with hundreds of lumberjacks dying every single year. It was a very high-risk job. So yes, you and your listeners possibly think I'm completely crazy doing a job like this, being a lumberjack, I mean. But you know what? I love my work. I love the great outdoors. I love the smell of the forest floor. And I love being out in nature. Yes, there are things about the job that make it perilous, and it is noble work. And there are possibly about 45 fatalities every year, even today. You see, there are all kinds of problems when it comes to felling a tree. Sometimes trees may just snap, just like that, when you didn't expect it. Or they might fall where you weren't anticipating. So we can get it wrong a lot of the time, even with our state of accuracy. Believe me, Sarah, I have personally had some near misses, and one of those near misses could have ended up very differently if it hadn't been for a Sasquatch. More about that in a moment. These days we have some really brilliant equipment that makes life a lot easier for loggers like me. Not that it is ever easy, mind you. The machine that we have is known as a fellow buncher, and it's a $500,000 piece of machinery that cuts down a tree in seconds. It really is brilliant. Sometimes if we're working in very steep, high forest terrain, that's when we have to really bring in the big guns. And that is, of course, when helicopters are used. And if the tree does not get lifted above the forest canopies, serious dangers can arise and human lives can be threatened. But I will not go into that right now. Among the lumberjacks, there have been sightings of Sasquatch over the years, but most of us have just kept our mouths shut, or some of us have been asked to, put it that way. On the day that I had my Sasquatch encounter, I was doing a job known as thinning of the forest. It's like being a tree surgeon in the woods. What we try to do is create more space between the trees to promote tree growth, to revitalize the forest and help increase the wildlife. We are very particular about selecting the superior trees to promote their growth and create enough sunlight for them to thrive, while we make sure we move the small trees growing under them so that they can promote this growth, and also we want to prevent fire hazards from occurring in the forest. So you see, my job is very versatile, and what we are doing is literally regenerating the forests. I remember the day of my Sasquatch encounter like it was yesterday. We came across a 1,000-year-old cedar tree, and it was rotten. We did not know this, of course, because cedars tend to be decay resistant, which is why they're often used to make log houses, canoes, and even kayaks. Well, we were bringing down this tree that was very old, but did not appear to be in great shape. Of course, we had no idea that inside it was totally rotten. So when the tree fell, even though we were using cutting-edge machinery, things got out of hand because it was rotten, and one of those branches literally fell away from the tree and was about to crush us. In a second, this bipedal, massive creature that I knew instantly was a Sasquatch intervened and held up this monstrous tree branch in his hand. He literally ripped the branch away as if it was nothing, snapped it and threw it across the forest floor where it landed safely. All three of us loggers just gawked in surprise. What else could we do? What would you do? Not only had this creature saved our lives, but his agility and quick intervention were completely staggering. Not even my fellow buncher machine, so to speak, could have been that efficient. The dexterity of this creature was like nothing I have ever seen. We all looked at him in awe and in stupefied silence. I think fear melted away into sheer admiration for what we had witnessed and gratitude for having our lives spared. This creature definitely had an intelligence, and that was clear. His expression was extremely benign and non-threatening. He looked advanced in age because his dark hair had become grey in places, and his skin was tough and leathery looking, and he had wrinkles on his forehead. He had the look of a great ape blended together with human-like features. His body was massive. I would estimate he was over 1,000 pounds and about 10 foot tall, with the most gargantuan feet I have ever seen, and huge toes that splayed more outwardly than ours do. He looked at us, gave us a nod, and simply disappeared into the woods in seconds. We all looked at each other, and no one said a word for about 5 minutes, because we were mesmerized by what we had seen. And then Peter looked at me and said, "Did you see what I thought we saw?" "It was a Sasquatch," I said. "That's what it was. It couldn't have been anything else," we all agreed. "Tell you what," Pete said, eyeing me with a mischievous twinkle in his brown eyes, "I'm not going to be telling my wife about this. She'll think I've gone bananas." "Did you see what he did? He saved our lives. We could have all been dead," I said. Soberly, we reflected on this cold, hard truth. "I think the creature must have known that the tree was rotten," Peter remarked. "Yes," I said, "they do understand their habitat because they live and thrive in the woods. They must know all about trees. I think they know what's going on even when they think we can't see them. They know everything that's going on in these woods." "But why would they help us?" Pete asked. "Why would they help people who are tearing up their habitat? If I was a Sasquatch, I would not want to help a lumberjack." "We were not tearing down the forest," I corrected him. "We were revitalizing the forest, encouraging tree growth and helping the wildlife. Maybe he knew that, which is why he helped us." We all agreed that this must have been the reason we were helped, which really made us realize that this mystical animal that stays well away from humans as much as possible does have an incredible understanding of its habitat and an extraordinary intelligence that you do not see in other animals. Anyway, the next day when we returned to our jobs, we were so grateful to be alive and continued to talk about our amazing experience with the giant of the woods. Suddenly noticed a whole pile of berries in the place where the rotten tree had been located. I was finally convinced that the creature was indeed thanking us. I have heard of Sasquatch gifting people, and these berries were in that specific location. What else could it have been? Another extraordinary thing that happened that day is that we found 2 enormous western cedars that had been snapped in such a way to show us that they were also very unhealthy and in really bad shape and needed to be cut down, and they could be hazardous. This means that we were able to be very careful in felling these particular trees. because they did fall apart easily and their limbs pretty much fell everywhere. On that day, we did hear whoops and tree knocks in the forest. So there you are, Sarah. A grateful, appreciative Bigfoot saved our lives that day. I've not had any other sightings since, but here's still hoping. What an amazing story. We've got such a wonderful story for you, all the way from London, England, believe it or not, from Victoria. But in fact, her Bigfoot encounter happened in Minnesota, here in America. So let's get started. Dear Sarah and all your listeners, I'm writing to tell you about my Bigfoot encounter that happened last year in 2019. My name is Victoria and I'm 18 years old. I live in London, England with my parents in the Wimbledon area. My father is American and is originally from Minnesota, but he moved out to London after he met my mother. And let's just say the rest is history. My father's brother, my uncle, lives in the Deep Haven area near Lake Minnetonka in Minnesota or somewhere thereabouts. The house where he lives is very beautiful, with magnificent and stunning views that look over the lake, and he has all the mod cons that you could ever imagine luxury living to have. Anyway, my American uncle Peter lives with his wife Beryl in this lavish, beautiful and stunning home. Both my uncle and aunt are consumed by their careers. They are so driven. Beryl is involved with interior decoration and she has her own business, which is thriving. And Peter is involved in the world of real estate, although I'm not exactly sure what his job entails. Anyway, I do not think they even considered having children of their own. I think Peter probably did, and I think he wanted children, but Beryl never did, and so that put an end to that. Anyway, Peter invited us to stay at his home last year, and my sister Natalie and I were delighted at the prospect of visiting America for the first time in our lives, because we had heard so much about your beautiful country. Anyway, when we arrived at their home, Peter made us very welcome, but you could tell Beryl, his wife, did not appreciate having us around. In fact, she was less than thrilled to see us. Every day, Beryl looked like she had stepped off the catwalk. She was so well groomed and always wore the most fabulous clothes. However, both Natalie and I decided from the word go that we did not like her. Beryl did not do any cooking because she wanted to preserve her long, pink, glittering talons, and so she got the cook to make us anything that we wanted, and that was pretty cool. However, the real bummer was that neither Natalie and I could relax in my uncle's home, because Beryl would always be looking over her shoulders, checking that we weren't damaging her furniture or dropping anything on her immaculate wooden flooring. I would overhear her all the time telling my uncle that she wished that we would go back to England because she was living in terror that we were going to ruin her white furnishings because we were so clumsy and heavy-handed. As you can imagine, overhearing that made me paranoid. I was so worried about dropping something, and then that's invariably what I did. I accidentally dropped my hot chocolate over her beautiful white settee. The cleaner tried to clean it up before Beryl noticed, but it was too late. Beryl came storming into the living room area, looking furious, and she literally had a tantrum on the spot. She told us that we were the clumsiest children that she had ever met, and that we were making her house look like a dump. I don't think I'm a real kid at 18, do you? That was the final straw for Beryl. She wanted to send us home to England immediately, but my uncle was not having it, and he wasn't keen on the idea. He wanted us to stay a bit longer because he liked having us around. He asked Natalie and I how we would feel about going camping somewhere in Minnesota on our own. We thought it was a wonderful idea, and as you can imagine, Beryl was more than delighted to get rid of us and took us to a camping shop to get us kitted out for the great outdoors, and no expense was spared, let me tell you. So that's how we found ourselves camping at Chippewa National Forest, where I believe there are about 1,300 lakes and tons of streams. You cannot imagine how thrilled we were to escape Beryl's meticulous clutches and to finally be enjoying the great outdoors. For the first time in days, we actually felt free, and it was so beautiful that we knew we had made the right decision to come camping. We loved the American wilderness. We decided we wanted to go and camp somewhere well off the beaten track, away from other hikers and holiday makers. We just wanted to be all on our own and enjoying the wildlife and the beautiful wetlands, which were just so magnificent. On day 6 of a very successful and happy camping holiday, we had explored so many country trails off the beaten track and really found a superb place to camp that night. It was close to a water source and very secluded, and we noticed plenty of wildlife there, especially white-tailed deer. The only big bummer about camping in Minnesota were all the mosquitoes. They were everywhere. So the mosquito balm Beryl had brought us was a lifesaver and worked a treat, let me tell you. Anyway, it was that night when we had been sitting by the fire roasting marshmallows that we suddenly heard someone whistling close to where we were camping. I was extremely upset because I thought someone was camping close to us, and I did not know how that could have happened. You would have thought we would have noticed if anybody was nearby. Hear that? I asked Natalie. Just our luck. Someone has set up camp close to us, and honestly, I don't know how this has happened. I thought we found a remote spot, said Natalie. That really is bad luck. I decided I wanted to find out where the other campers were camping. What is the point, said Natalie. We cannot exactly go camping somewhere else in the middle of the night. That would be completely crazy. I agreed and started to settle down into my sleeping bag when I heard the whistling sound again, and this time it was too close for comfort. I sat up sharply, listening closely to the sound of the night and wondering where these people were camping and how it was that Natalie and I had not seen them setting up camp in the first place. Suddenly I heard footsteps very close to our tents, and then this horrible, heavy breathing sound that sounded like it was being put on because it was so heavy. I was mad. Whoever these campers were, they were now trying to scare us with some kind of practical joke that was far from funny. Or they were just checking us out in the middle of the night. Who knew? Who does that, I thought. I woke up Natalie, who was now fast asleep, and told her what had just happened. Those campers back there are trying to scare us, I said. I think that is really mean of them, creeping us out like this. I distinctly heard their footprints outside our tent, and one of them was making heavy breathing sounds on purpose, just to scare us. Well, let me tell you, Nats, it's not going to work. Natalie groaned. They're probably just curious to see who was camping close to them. Go back to sleep, she said, pulling the sleeping bag over her head. So it was then that I decided to investigate myself all on my own. Obviously, Natalie wasn't going to join me, and so that was that. I took out my torch and I slipped quietly out of my tent. I was not happy that someone was playing tricks on us, and I really wanted to give them a piece of my mind and a taste of their own medicine, even if it was late at night. I could hear a strange noise coming from an area within the trees. I do not know how to describe the noise, but it was like a very loud chattering sound, but it sounded angry. I do not know how else to explain it, but it gave me the impression that two people were having an argument about something in a strange language. I thought that the two campers must have got into an argument or something. Maybe someone was mad with the person who had tried to scare us in the night and was giving them a piece of their own mind, I thought. So I crept closer to where the noise was coming from, and by now I was extremely curious, and I do not mind admitting rather nosy, to say the least. I switched my torch off because I did not want the campers to see me spying on them. For some reason I wanted to eavesdrop on what they were fighting about. I hid behind a large tree that was covered in heavy moss and had a very massive girth. I peered around the corner of the tree and saw two figures fighting each other. I remember thinking that they were very large men, but in the moonlight I could see that their arms were way too long to be human, and also their whole bodies were covered with hair. From the back view they almost resembled bears because of the broadness of their stature, and the dark hair, of course. But these creatures, whatever they were definitely not human, and they were definitely not bears. What the heck are they, I wondered. The one creature that appeared to be winning the fight was a very large specimen. He was about 8 foot in height and about 700 pounds. I watched him closely, and he literally threw his smaller counterpart on the ground, who was about 6 foot in height and a lot smaller than he was. He then proceeded to pounce on the creature and hold him down with his weighty, muscular arm in what looked like a very dominant stance. It was like he was trying to establish his superior dominance, if that makes any sense. Like he was saying, I'm the boss, and accept it now. The 6-footer started to make a whimpering, chattering sound from beneath the crushing hold of his opponent, as if his opponent was actually hurting him a bit. Then suddenly the larger creature let go of his hold as if the victory had been won, and the smaller one had surrendered to his authority. The smaller creature looked pathetic and almost puny compared to the large beast, even though he was in his own right pretty large. I could see him looking very sorry for himself, and his head hung low in a very submissive pose, as if he had accepted that he was well and truly defeated. The larger creature let out a warning growl, and then he started to chatter ever so excitedly. I watched his whole body bend down in a squatting position, and then he threw something on the ground over his shoulders as if it was nothing. It was a dead white-tailed deer, and a big one at that. I realized that this is what the creatures had been fighting over. I watched the massive creature walk away with the huge deer slung over his shoulders, and I had a good view of his face in the moonlight. I was astonished to see his face looked almost human, but it was set in a head that looked cone-shaped, and he had virtually no neck and monstrous shoulders and chest. I could not see the ears because they were covered by his long hair. I noticed he appeared to have a beard and a moustache. The other areas of his face were naked like a human's, only the skin tone was more greyish, and the skin more rugged and hardened by the environment, I should imagine. As the creature walked away, I noticed that he made light work of his movements, because he literally glided across the ground as if he was on roller skates. I noticed his strides were enormous. One footstep was equivalent to 5 of ours, and I'm not joking. That's how quick he was. The little creature, whatever he was, looked defeated and disappointed, and he walked away chatting sorrowfully to himself in a way that suggested that he was very far from happy with the outcome, but nevertheless he went on his way. I watched the scene in horror. I could hear the larger creature walking away, and he was whistling to himself happily. Oh, I thought, so this was where the whistling had come from that I'd heard earlier before. You may think I rushed back to the tent as quickly as I could, but I did not. I was so stunned by what I'd seen, almost as if my body had been tasered. I just stood there for a long time in silence, hardly daring to believe what I'd seen. I even rubbed my eyes fiercely, trying to see if indeed I had fallen asleep and been dreaming all this crazy stuff. I was not. This had really happened, and I was standing behind a tree to prove it. The whole thing was weird. And what were those creatures, I wondered? I'd never seen anything like them before. Anyway, when I woke up Natalie and told her what I had seen, she was convinced I'd been having nightmares and it was just my imagination on overdrive. But I knew what I had seen. After our camping trip, we returned to England, and one day online I found a picture of a beast that reminded me of the creature I had seen in Minnesota. And after doing a lot of Googling and looking at YouTube, I realized that I'd seen a Bigfoot. I do not think Bigfoot lives in this part of the world, in England I mean. If he did, I think there would have been some documented sightings and people would talk about it here. However, if you mention the word Bigfoot here in England, they look at you as if you're completely bonkers and that all this stuff is hocus pocus and something that belongs to a Harry Potter novel. However, I know differently, and I know what I saw that night was a Bigfoot. And what's more, I'm sure your listeners will believe me. By the way, I love American people, and I love your country, with the exception of Beryl, of course. And I thought Minnesota was such an amazing place, and it was such a privilege to go there. I can honestly say I was not afraid of the Bigfoots, even though they were scary. But I think it was because their attention was focused on each other, and they were so wrapped up in their fight that they never even noticed me. And I kind of felt in that moment that they never would. I do feel privileged to have seen what I saw that night, and the good news is that Natalie finally believes me after I showed her all the stuff about Bigfoot. But she is now very upset that she never got to see him too. All I say is serves her right for not being as nosy as me. Love to all you and all your listeners, and hello to all you people from Minnesota. I've got a lovely story for you tonight, and it's about Mothman. So let's get started. Dear Sarah, my family is from West Virginia and Mount Pleasant, and so naturally we had heard all about the Mothman. But I well and truly believed it was just a mystical legend and nothing more until I spoke to my grandmother one day. Mothman is not a legend, she assured me. He's a real live entity, although he has been linked with supernatural experiences and encounters. What makes you so sure he's real? I asked. My grandmother stoked the flames of the huge fire that was crackling away in the old stone fireplace. It was a freezing night, and the heavy winds were whistling in the background, causing the windows of my grandmother's cabin to rattle. This was the perfect night, I thought, to bring up mothman and other ghost stories, because it was an airily cold night with a rather formidable ambience, the ideal setting for a lovely, scary story. "Let's have a nice warm cup of chocolate first," said my gran, "and I will tell you my story." I looked at my sister Gabriella excitedly. "She's going to tell us all about Mothman," I said. Gabrielle made a pooh-pooh kind of face and said, "You know, it's just a legend, nothing more." My grandmother handed us each a large mug of piping hot chocolate filled with baby marshmallows, just the way we loved it. "That's where you're wrong, Gabriella dear. Mothman is as real as you and I," she said. "Do not go doubting him, because he could make an appearance in your life. He has this habit of showing himself to non-believers." My sister shuddered. "All right," she said. "I believe in you, Mothman, so no personal visitations, please." My grandmother sat down and straightened the bodice of her dress, and then her expression grew gravely serious. On her lap was a wooden box containing letters from her sister Alice from the year 1966. "Why was Alice sending you letters from Virginia? Were you not living here also?" I asked in surprise. "Is this not your childhood home?" "Of course it is," she said. "No, I was living in England then for a year with my father's brother, who had been taken ill, and my father sent me abroad to take care of him." "What was wrong with him?" I asked. "He had cancer in the bones, so he didn't live very long," she said. "He survived a year, after which I returned home to Virginia. He was a very nice man, and his death was a tragedy. He was 45 when he died." "Way too young," I agreed. "In those days, living to 45 was not always such a bad innings," said my grandmother. "Growing up, a lot of people died at very young ages. From influenza, it wasn't uncommon in those days, you know." "How old were you at the time?" I asked curiously. "About 24, and my sister was 2 years younger than I was." "So she was about 22 when she sent you those letters?" "That's right," my grandmother nodded, and untied one of the letters from a small pile of envelopes that was tied up in a red ribbon. "Let me read you this," she said, putting on her spectacles and settling her eyes on the written script. It read, "April the 22nd, 1966. Dear Sis, I miss you so much. It's not the same without you here. How is Uncle Fred? Is he getting any better? I do hope so. Dad feels really bad that he asked you to take care of his brother. But you've always been the great caretaker of the family since Mum died. So I know Uncle Fred is in the best of hands. He really is. I want to tell you something, Sis, and please do not get alarmed, because I know how protective you can be over me. I just can't tell anyone what I saw last night. I've never been this terrified in all of my life. It was about 10 o'clock when I retired to bed. I had made dinner for Dad and I'd fed the dog. At about 10:30, I heard this loud flapping sound coming from the garden, and Terry was barking madly. I've never heard him bark so much. He yapped and he yapped, so I got out of bed to let him out in the garden. I followed him because his little legs went tearing towards the wooded area of our garden that faces the valley on the western slope. You know the part where I mean. It was there that I saw the creature staring at me. He had huge diamond-shaped red compound eyes that were burning like red coals. He was standing on 2 human-like legs, but they were thick and long, and he had the most enormous wingspan, like a dragon, and spanned about 12 feet in width. I promise you, Sis, I just froze to the spot, but Terry kept barking at this creature. He gave me one more look, the creature I mean, and then he just flew away on his wings into the wood. I know I never imagined this, sis. The next night I woke up to see the creature looking through at me from the bedroom window. Sis, I saw those glowing red eyes all over again, and this time he stared at with me for such a menacing look from his eyes, and it must have been at least 5 minutes. And then once again I heard his flapping wings flying away. I think Terry heard it too, because at that moment he didn't stop yapping. On night 3, sis, I was too scared to sleep. I didn't retire to bed. I sat by the fire with Terry on my lap and was woken again by Terry's loud yaps and the rustling sound of that horrible creature's wings. Once again I saw the red eyes staring at me through the window. I screamed at him, sis, at the top of my lungs, and he flew away. I said, "Please go away and never come back, never, never come back." Dad came rushing into the room and asked me why I was screaming so loudly and yelling, and what was the commotion, and what was the heavy rustling sound. So even Dad heard the creature's wings. I told Dad I was just having a bad dream. He asked me why I was sleeping on the settee in the living room. A few nights have passed and I have not seen the creature again, but sis, whatever he is, he scared the living daylights out of me. So please hurry home, because I'm afraid of this thing returning. Suppose it comes back. I dread to think. Wow, I said when my gran finished the letter. That was some story. Your sister was really freaked out by that creature. My sister was never driven by fanciful whims, said my grandmother. If she saw that creature, you better believe she saw it. When I returned from England, my sister insisted on sleeping in my room so that she was never ever alone again. I believe she was terrified for many years after the encounter. Did she ever see the creature again? I asked. No, never, said my gran, but she did hear his wings one night, and I did too. You did? I gasped. What did it sound like, Gran? The wings, I mean. If you were hitting a large textbook on your bed, it sounded a little like that, but you could tell they were wings. So now, said my gran, folding away her letter and replacing it in her wooden box. Do you believe in Mothman now? We both nodded. Mothman now was a very real entity because we knew our gran would never lie to us. That's my story. I hope you found it of interest. It was a lovely story. Thank you so very much. I've got a very exciting Bigfoot encounter for you tonight. And it comes from a man called Buddy, who had a wonderful experience and an incredible Sasquatch encounter, and he actually encountered many Sasquatches. So let's give the story a go, and let's get started. He writes, "Hello, Sarah, and all your listeners. My Bigfoot encounter happened a year ago, and it was an experience that I shall never forget. Even though looking back it seems almost as if it was a big dream. However, I assure you it was not. It all happened when I decided to take my BMW 310 GS on a 5,000-mile solo trip on the Trans-American Trail, which for your listeners is a motorbike ride on all the rural country back roads from Tennessee to the Oregon coast in the west. I armed myself with all the necessary provisions and set off. I'm the kind of guy that literally could live off-grid in a remote place like Alaska and not see a soul for months without a bother in the world. I have always been adventurous, self-reliant, independent and industrious. I enjoy my own company best and, of course, the natural world. I was very excited about my trip. It was an opportunity to drive down the dirt roads in the middle of nowhere with the breeze blowing on my face and watching the world go by on the back of a powerful engine. What could be more exciting than that? Now, I wish I could give you places, dates and times, but I cannot, because many of those details are a blur to me because of the concussion that I sustained many months later that has also affected parts of my memory. All I can remember are the details that I'm going to share with you now, that I really believe will not only blow the minds of you, but of your listeners as well. So keep your seatbelts fastened because we're going on a journey to Bigfoot country. Where I was, I do not remember. All I remember seeing was a herd of elk and they appeared to be rattled by something that had run across the dirt road in the distance. They did not seem bothered by the roar of my engine. It seemed that something else had frightened them, and they were afraid and running across the road as fast as they could. It was almost as if they were being stalked by a lion or some other predator. I must admit, on my bike I couldn't see too clearly what was going on, but I did continue down this dirt road, and my machine was vibrating under my thighs because it was a very uneven road, strewn with rocks and boulders. It was no easy drive, especially as the road was both muddy and wet. Before I knew it, my motorbike skidded on the road and literally rolled over something. I could hear the most enormous thud, as if I'd hit something really humongous. And then there it was, lying on the road next to me, a huge elk lying dead. But surely I would have seen it, I thought, slipping in and out of consciousness. I could feel my head throbbing. It was just the most terrible head pain that I've ever had. My ankles were broken, my arms hurt, and my femur bone at the top of my leg was killing me for some reason. I could not get up. I was lying on the road, motionless, barely able to move. My breathing was laboured, even though I had not punctured a lung, but maybe it was the shock that was finally getting to me. Unbeknown to me, my helmet was flung off during the accident. Possibly I'd failed to put it on securely enough, but I had sustained some bruising on my brain. Of course, I did not know this at the time, which was why I was drifting in and out of consciousness the whole time. I woke up to find myself being lifted up in the largest arms you could ever imagine. My face looked down at two of the largest biceps I have ever seen, and they rippled with muscle. The arm hair was about 1.5 inches long, and it was fairly thick, but like a human's at the same time. I really thought for a moment that I was in the arms of a giant like King Kong. I did not feel any animosity from the creature. It kind of seemed like he was trying to help me. I could sense that I was weightless in this creature's arms. It was as if I weighed next to nothing to him. And believe me, I'm a hefty fellow of well over 300 pounds, so this creature was hell of a strong. I was placed away from the middle of the road to the side of the road. I guess the animal was putting me out of harm's way, and I was extremely grateful. If any car had come down the road, it is unlikely I would have been seen, and so I could have been instantly killed. The thought of that horrified me. But how was I going to get out of here, I thought. I cannot move a muscle. And the pain, of course, was excruciating. The creature left me in a safe spot on the side of the road and came back with tree trunks laying in his arms. He carried them across the road as if they were nothing, and believe me, they were big tree trunks. No man could lift that on his own, I thought, but they looked as if, but I think a man could possibly have dragged it out of the way, but definitely not lifted it up without some serious help. I suddenly realized what he was doing. He was creating a barricade in the middle of the road so that any driver coming down the beaten track or dirt road would need to get out of their car to drag the trunk to the side so that they could pass. If they got out of their vehicle, they would definitely see me and call for help. I suddenly felt more positive and more upbeat. Surely someone would come down this road and take me to hospital, because I knew I was in a bad way and I needed urgent medical help. I looked up at the animal and felt no fear, even though he was enormously intimidating in his appearance. Sorry about that. But I sensed an intelligence to him. You see, I think that although he was definitely not human, he possessed some human-like qualities that perhaps he saw in me. I do not think that he would hurt something that reminded him of himself, do you? The next thing I knew was that there was more of these creatures, and they all surrounded me. I think there were about 8 of them. The shortest one must have been about 6 foot tall, so they towered over me. I got the impression that they really had not seen many humans before, because they studied me curiously as if I was a specimen that was interesting to look at. The small one ventured closer to me and inspected my skin. I think he was surprised at how white I was, and that I had no real hair on my arms. Well, that's what I think he was thinking anyway. They chatted among each other, and it sounded like a strange language. Everyone seemed to know what the other was saying. It was extraordinary. I did feel like an unusual specimen at the zoo, being put on show as the eyes just studied me for a long time. They also were looking at my motorbike that they had now brought to the side of the road and was a total wreck. They fondled it like it was some kind of strange toy. All the time they chatted among each other, and then they all went, leaving me all on my own. As it got darker, I noticed a solitary Bigfoot standing 50 yards away from me. He did not move the whole night, but stood there like a statue the whole time while he was guarding me. Every so often there would be owl hoots and whooping sounds during the night, and sometimes this guard of a Bigfoot would respond by hooting back. The next morning I woke up to find all kinds of wild berries, strange roots, and things like that lying at my feet. I was famished and thirsty. I even ate the roots that seemed to satisfy my hunger and thirst, and were surprisingly sweet to the taste. I've never seen these roots before or since, so I do not know what they were, but some of them tasted pretty good, like roasted parsnips, and another knobbly-looking root had a mango-like taste to it, but not nearly as sweet. Later that morning, a farmer found me lying on the road and called an ambulance, and I spent some time in an Oregon hospital. So from what I've learned, I must have managed to complete a great deal of my road trip. The trouble is, I cannot recount much of it, apart from the moments before and after the accident. I was in hospital for several weeks. I had a few operations to fix various broken bones, ankles, femurs and hips. Not good, I know. I also sustained a little bruising on the brain, but here is hoping that all the memory that I had about my road trip will return to me sometime soon. I have a lot to thank Bigfoot for. Please keep my details confidential. I'm only telling you my story because of your promises to keep my story private. With many thanks. Thank you so much for your wonderful story from rural Mississippi. So let's get started. Dear Sarah and all your listeners, I have always kept my mouth shut about my Bigfoot experience, and I was never going to tell anyone about it. But your assurance of keeping my name truly anonymous really now gives me a voice, and for that I truly appreciate it. So many, many thanks. My story happened in central Mississippi. I want to keep my details as vague as possible if you do not mind. Our house was literally parked in the woods. We live in timber country with lots of red dirt roads around and plenty of thick brush with lots and lots of trees. To put it bluntly, we rarely are in the middle of nowhere, and our nearest neighbor is a couple of miles away. I grew up in the 1970s, and life then was so much less complicated in those days. My sister and I had a brilliant childhood. My sister's name was Alice, but to tell you the truth, most of the time she felt like a brother to me because she was an outdoor, very boyish sort of person, and one of the most courageous people I have ever known, and I hasten to say she still is today. Alice and I spent countless hours in the forest because it was alive with animals, and it was always fun to just go exploring and watching the deer drinking at the creek. Even though our farm is very vast and has ample acreage and huge areas of forest and wood, I had learnt to navigate the area well because my father had been a great hunter and had taught me how to hunt. One day my sister and I decided to venture further into the woods because we wanted to find a special place to go and play, and there was a lot of unexplored territory on our land, which made it very exciting for us. I was lucky because my father trusted me to take care of Alice, being the boy of the family, and they were pretty easygoing about us wandering off and exploring. So one beautiful, warm and sunny day, Alice and I ventured into the woods. It was unusual because we expected to hear birds chirping and to see the odd squirrel or chipmunk or even deer crossing our path, but nothing of the kind. The ambience of the forest seemed eerily quiet, which was weird, to say the least, because I had never known it like this before. Finally, Alice and I stumbled upon this beautiful stream, where the water flowed over the boulders and made a wonderful gushing sound. It was really magnificent, and I was surprised I had not discovered it before. I was also dumbfounded to see that there was no deer drinking the crisp, beautiful water, and there wasn't even a dragonfly in sight, which from our neck of the woods was particularly unusual. That is how quiet it was. Alice wasted no time. She pulled up her pants to above her knees and started to paddle in the cool, crisp water. I tore off my shoes and rushed into the water to join her. We then went and sat on the rocky ledge where we watched the water gushing over the pebbles. It was Alice who started to throw pebbles into the water, and I followed her lead. We would make secret wishes every time we threw a pebble in the water. "I'll make a wish for you," said Alice, picking up a smooth stone and throwing it into the water. "Shh," I whispered. "Did you hear that?" We heard a sound of chattering in the distance. It sounded like people talking in a strange language, which was very odd because there was no one on our land, or put it this way, no one who should have been on our land. I decided to tease Alice. "The woods are haunted," I teased her. "Maybe it's ghost voices." I should not have wasted my time, because Alice shrugged and proceeded to throw more pebbles into the water. "I'm not afraid of ghosts," she said. "Even if I see one, I don't think I'd be that worried, you know. It wouldn't bother me that much." I was disappointed. There was no teasing Alice. She just did not scare. She was braver than I was, and I'd always known it, so I wasn't going to have any fun riling her up. Suddenly we heard the sounds of owls quite close to where we were sitting. But the weird thing was that it sounded like they were answering each other, because the tones were so different, but they were definitely owl calls. "Did you hear that?" whispered Alice. "Who would have thought that we would get owls calling during the day? We have not heard any bird calls until now, and then we hear owls in the middle of the day. You've got to admit that's really weird." Another thing I'd like to mention is we also had smelt a pungent odor in the air. Alice described it as skunk-like and putrid, but I felt the mixture was the smell was a mixture of dead animal and urine all together. We did look around for the source of the smell, but we could not find where it was coming from, and really we were not going to let this ruin our fun. "We must come back here tomorrow," Alice begged me. "We'll bring a picnic lunch. It'll be so, so fun." The next day Alice and I diligently returned to the beautiful creek. On our way there we did once again not see any sign of a rabbit or a fleeting deer. It was incredibly quiet, which is unusual for our property. We also noticed that some tree branches had been snapped on the route that we took to the stream. "Look at these branches that have been snapped," I said, pointing to some of the tree breaks that we had not noticed the day before. They looked as if they had only been recently snapped. Alice did not make a comment. I do not think it bothered her at all, or she just didn't care. Her focus was returning to our new secret place, the beautiful stream we had found the previous day. I have to say it was a magnificent day. It was warm and beautiful, but not too hot, which is the way that Alice and I both like it. We both paddled in the cool water and proceeded to throw pebbles in the deeper end of the stream as we sat on a couple of large boulders. Once again we played our wishing game, but we spoke our wishes out aloud this time. "I wish I'd never have to grow up," sighed Alice. "I want to be young forever, because then we don't have to ever do anything but play and have fun, no responsibilities like Mum and Dad." It was at that moment I remember when we saw a pebble being flung towards us, narrowly missing Alice's shoulder and landing perfectly in the water. I was stunned. Several more pebbles were thrown at us, but with such precision it was uncanny, and from a fair distance, I might add. I mean, who on earth can throw a pebble from such a distance? I knew that I couldn't. "Who on earth can throw a pebble like that?" gasped Alice in surprise. "That was a brilliant shot." "Yes, but who's throwing them?" Alice pondered for a while and then giggled. "I bet you it's Ernest," she said. "Maybe he's not so boring after all. Perhaps he does have a sense of humor. I thought he was a stick in the mud." Ernest was my father's brother's son, who was about 7 years older than us. And he was a kind of person that just liked to read books all day and never venture outside. He appeared to us to be studious and boring. I tried to agree with Alice, but in my heart I just knew that Ernest would never be able to throw a pebble with such precision like that. Cut it out! Ernest, we know it's you, Alice shouted out. Come on from your hiding place. Come and join us. We've got a picnic here. Come on, Ernest, out you come. For a long while we were all quiet. The pebble throwing had stopped and everything was silent again. He's a spoil sport, sighed Alice. He's not going to show himself. Typical. Well, let's go and enjoy our picnic, said Alice, returning to the bank where our basket was filled with peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, banana bread, and icy cold lemonade. I'm famished, I said eagerly as we darted over the rocks to our picnic stash. But when we got there, the basket was completely empty. Everything was gone, apart from a couple of paper napkins that were wrinkled. Alex looked shocked, and then she became cross. It's one thing to throw pebbles at us, she snapped, but to steal our picnic, now that's mean. Once again Alice shouted out into the forest, Come on out, Ernest. Give us our picnic back now. We know what you're doing. The forest answered us with our calls, and so Alice and I started to investigate where they were coming from. I know you're there, Ernest, Alice called. I'm going to find you. You'll not get away with this. Wait until I tell Mum and Dad what you've done. Alice was looking into the forest for any signs of our cousin, but suddenly she froze, and then she pushed me fiercely. We're going now, she demanded. We need to get out of here fast, she snapped, pushing me so hard that I nearly fell over. I obeyed Alice without even thinking twice about it, because her face told me everything. I'd never seen such fear written in her eyes, and Alice did not rattle easily. Walk fast, she demanded, and do not look behind you, and do not run. As we were walking, I could feel terror rising up in my chest. Maybe Alice had seen a panther or something, I thought. I could tell we were being stalked, because I could hear the sounds of leaves rustling under feet from behind us, and I would occasionally hear a tree branch just snap. This was beyond weird. When we got home, I just breathed a huge sigh of relief. Alice looked at me intently. Did you see it? She said. Did you see that thing that was following us? What thing? I asked. I didn't see anything. I don't know, she said. But it was huge. I'm not kidding, like a real live monster. It was dark, dark black. It was hairy. But it wasn't a bear. I can't explain. It looked like a man, like an ape. It was hairy and ugly, and there were others too. I could see them. They were the ones that threw pebbles at us. It wasn't Ernest. They were the ones that stole our food. And they were the ones that made owl calls during the day. It all makes sense now. We must tell Mum and Dad now, I said. Dad can kill that horrible thing. You will not tell Dad anything. Are you crazy? He'll stop us from ever going into the forest again, and that's not going to happen. Understand? I reluctantly agreed. It was a while before Alice and I ventured into the forest again, but when we did, we always made sure that we could hear the bugs and the animals, and then we knew that those horrible things were not around. If ever the forest had no sign of movement, we would keep our distance, and that did happen from time to time. We never knew what the monster was, because in those days we'd never ever heard of Sasquatch. But all these years later, I am convinced we encountered that mythical creature called Bigfoot, so I'm a believer. Thank you, Sarah, for letting me tell my story, and thank your listeners for listening. Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.